And this is
About this event, or
about you and Christopher and this event. Yes, ma'am. We're going to begin with Liz Ann, and she says, I wish Carol would tell how they met. Their first date, something charming and romantic. When did she know her life had changed?
Shortly after meeting him, but I can't tell the story because each time I've tried to tell it, which is just a few times, it holds less punch and meaning for me, so I hope you'll excuse me if I keep it to myself.
How long were you married?
We were married since 91, but we were together, it will be 24, 25 years coming up in February. We met around the time of Salman Rushdie's The Fatwa.
And how many kids do you have?
I have 2 stepchildren, Christopher's children by an earlier marriage, and we have a daughter.
All right, another Facebook comment that we've received, and this is from Matt. And Matt says, was Christopher aware of the extent in which he inspired people to educate themselves?
Maybe not. He may not have known the extent of his influence and reach, but he did often run into, especially on college campuses, he'd run into so many students who mentioned that he had changed their life, quote unquote, so because of his writings. And I know that he really did have that effect and continues to. I still hear from so many young people on different campuses that he's really changed the way that they thought.
Carol Blue, it'll be December, it'll be a full year that Christopher's been gone. Overall, what's this last year been like for you?
Well, it's very quiet, very silent, as you can imagine, without him. I can't think what else to say. I understand why you ask it, but I think I need to get a little more distance on it before I could reveal that publicly.
In the afterwords to Mortality, you wrote about finding scraps of paper all around the apartment and notes in books, etc. What's that like to find those? And do you have another potential book planned with all those notes?
Well, people have talked about, the various letters that were written to him and from him, and the notes and various writings unpublished. So I don't know, eventually we'll get around to that. The publisher's keen. I can just say it's so, I think 2/3 or 3/4 of the books on the shelf have his writing in the back of them, and it's always wonderful to pull a book off the shelf and then see his writing. It's as if he's speaking again. It's really fantastic. And I found other tons and tons of stacks of paper with notes I hadn't seen before when I was clearing the papers and the books away from the windows in preparation for the storm that never came to Washington.
In Mortality, toward the end, and you also write this in the afterwards, you mention it, that toward the end of his life, and you put these in Mortality, just sentences or just a short paragraph or just words that Christopher was writing.
Yeah, actually he was completely with it until the last day of his life and could have written a story for a magazine. It just happens that he he was writing on a hospital tray and typing instead of writing longhand because his arm was swollen from various IVs. So those notes in the back, the kind of fragmentary writings are just those notes he was typing that particular day in the hospital.
One of the tweets we received for you comes from the Norwalk, Connecticut Library, and they say, thank you for writing the afterwards. You offer a new perspective on it. What was your goal with the afterwards?
Well, I was asked to do it. I wasn't keen to, but I wanted to do it because it was the right thing to do. I was asked to reveal some side of Christopher, perhaps that he hadn't revealed about himself, but I didn't. I wanted to maintain the privacy of our family and protect our children's privacy. So I was trying to figure out how I could give something intimate of myself or about Christopher that would also basically keep us out of the public realm, and I think I achieved that. So that's what I was trying to do.
Why weren't you eager to write it?
It was so soon. I wasn't really ready to contemplate him in that way for public consumption. But in the end, I tried not to, and I agonized, but in the end it kind of came spilling out over a couple hours as if it was Christopher writing it.
Let me go back to the comments here. We have another one that I wanted to ask you about. And this comes from Sharon. And Sharon says, I would never miss a chance to see a debate or an interview with Christopher Hitchens, though I agreed with him only about 50% of the time.
Well, that's the ultimate compliment, don't you think?
Did you get that a lot from people? I don't agree with you, but I enjoy watching you.
Yeah, people I think admired his craft and his technique and his brilliance at oratory. So.
And Sharon goes on to say, the world lost a great mind with his passing. So, and here are some Twitter comments, and I apologize for stepping away and leaving our guest Carol Blue alone by herself for a minute. If I could get you to stand right there so the camera can see and then people could see as well. This is Stephen on Twitter.
Okay.
And you address this a little bit in your speech, but if you could expand, why did Hitchens move to the U.S.? To advance his career, or did he feel a sense of mission towards spreading his ideas?
Well, no, initially he came, he always had been, he writes about in his memoir how he'd always been drawn in by America. And he came right after Oxford. He was awarded a special scholarship that allowed him to travel around America. And he went from the East Coast all the way to the West Coast and back through the South. And he felt a deep affinity for it, perhaps because of the founders' writing, because of Paine and Jefferson, how big and various it was. He'd always just felt, he said, this kind of visceral subconscious pull. But he came because Victor Noveski of The Nation proposed a swap between himself and an American writer at The Nation. So that Kai Bird, the Nation writer, went to the New Statesman, and Christopher came from the New Statesman to the Nation. Once having arrived at the Nation, never wanted to leave the Nation or America, though he ultimately did leave the Nation.
In Hitch-22, he writes about his naturalization, taking the citizenship test. Did you go with him for that ceremony?
I saw him study. Yeah, I was at the ceremony. It was a very small ceremony at the Jefferson Memorial, and it was conducted on April 13th, Christopher's birthday, which also happens to have been Jefferson's birthday, so it was kind of marvelous. But I noticed I gave him my constitutional law book from my Berkeley days, and he studied the Constitution and really memorized it, and that was fun.
Well, Carol Blue, where did you grow up? And you mentioned Berkeley. Where'd you go to school? What's your background? A little bit about you.
I grew up at where Stanford, California is, and I went to Berkeley to get away from Stanford. And I studied political theory, and then I was hired by a man I was working for as an assistant while I was a student, Robert Scheer, who at that time was at the LA Times, so he brought me there, and I worked there for a while, and I guess the rest isn't history, but anyway, that's a bit of the early background.
And I want to get in this comment from Jill. Jill tweets in, Ms. Blue, what influence do you think Mr. Hitchens' writing had on shaping women's history in America and the world?
I'm not sure. I know that he was the most egalitarian, seriously, bloke I ever knew. He was absolutely, he thought of women and men as complete equals. He wrote that piece for Vanity Fair, Why Women Aren't Funny. But, it was one more assignment, and he wrote it. And if you actually read it, it doesn't actually, the article doesn't say what the title might imply. He was complete. He was so non-sexist for a guy who was such a man's man and so loved by women. I mean, he was very charismatic. Women adored him, but he didn't play the sexual card at all. So I don't know if he has a place in, quote, women's history per se, but just in the liberation of all groups. I mean, he would definitely have thought that the Ledbetter Law made sense. He would never think that a woman should make less than a man, something like that. But I think maybe there's just that's it. I have nothing to say more about that.
Just a couple more and then we'll let you go. This is James. I loved Christopher so much. I always wanted to call him up on the phone. At the end, did he say any prayers or call a priest?
No, it didn't even come up. we were talking about poetry and various other things. Nobody thought of it. It just didn't even register. Sorry to say. Oh, and I wanted to say that among the many people, I was thinking of Ayan Hirsi Ali, he was a great supporter of and who's a great chum. She was many. I mean, I thought he did. If he really talked about women's rights as it pertained to the Mideast and Africa and various backward religious practices that treated women as lesser citizens.
Carol Blue. She has written the afterwords to her husband's book, Mortality. Here is the book. And finally, Carol Blue, when was this picture taken on the back?
That was just a few months before he died. I'm not that thrilled with it. He looks so sad, doesn't he? But he still looks really handsome.
Carol Blue, thank you for joining us here on Book TV. We appreciate
it. Wiggy. I've been at this for hours. I think I sounded like a teeny bopper jerk. But anyway, thanks for having me.
On TV now for the last 20 minutes talking to you. And her first question is, was that live? Well, we appreciate your time very much.
I'm just so knackered. I'm so sorry, but thanks for having me.
It was a pleasure to meet you. So that was Carol Blue, Christopher Hitchens' widow. Unscripted, as you can see right there. Well, we're here in Chapman Auditorium, and there's one more event in here today, and that's Bill O'Reilly talking about his books. Our plan was to cover him and bring him to you live. However, Mr. O'Reilly has prohibited Book TV from being in the room with him. So we will not be bringing you that live today. Now, we want to let you know, though, we will be live again tomorrow. And here, very quickly, is a look at tomorrow's schedule. James Patterson, beginning at noon. The novelist, the thrill writer. He's going to be here. He's one of the top-selling authors in all of the United States. He